to the hay, all you sports fans out there in the tubosphere, or you, the individual, as part of the collective. Welcome to Fast Track, Sports Track Hunt here on Talk Radio of the OMSR. I am your brief but concise host, Will, the alternative ESPN Sports Thrill. Always do a little show like this to let you know this, that, and the other, what's coming up, clip order-wise. You get a significantly longer highlights reel that way. Plus, the quickie sport rant of the segment. Why? Well, that's all due to the fabulous OMSR sponsor, being the DMCA. So many thanks to that and all the goodies it covers. All the video highlights courtesy to ESPN and Theherd with Call It. Everything else, I can't whistle to save my life today. Forget about it. You get the point. To the OMSR. Yeah, now you can do it. Anywho, the wherefores. It's coming up. It's taken from the Herd earlier this morning. I like covering Colin. Colin and Will, the OMSR, we share a lot of pointers. I don't necessarily say as many polarizing things. I dare say I try to have like a little more mass appeal, especially in the context of YouTube. But I will say I like his style, and I think most of you do as well. I'm just throwing this out there a little bit differently than I typically do before we get into what's coming up clip order-wise, because on some of the Monday morning quarterbacking playlist on the channel segments, there have been some comments like really flip. You know, the OMSR has been, I don't say I'm the pioneer behind this, but if you read in the description, it fairly clearly states, read between the lines. You can get your point across without being nasty or bad language or leaving flip comments. So it's like that. It's like this and like that. Okay, so we're talking briefly and concisely about Phil off to New York. All this talk going on, and it's done. Nice little short by Chris Broussard. Sort of reminds us all why this works, because I think we all sort of forgot Phil's roots. So you'll see that, and then the discussion, with Colin on the Herd. So on the quickie sport rant of the segment, can a guy in the front office get the credit that he is due when an organization is run well? He will if Phil Jackson can turn the New York Knicks around, because if next year is suddenly, the inverse of this year, everyone's going to turn to that. And I will say, in defense of alternative, not so much religious experiences, but philosophy. Yours truly, Will, the OMSR, being a Taoist, which a lot of Zen Buddhism and all that gets its roots and tenets from. The origin of yin and yang, the Tai Chi and all that, Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching. That's why it works with some of these players, because it makes you think. That which is doing by not doing. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Yes, all this comes from the Tao. Zen Buddhism, they're in second place. Okay, thanks for watching. That's what's coming up. No silly DUIs while you're out there. Roll clips.
We knew this day would come. It had to. The connections were too strong. The sentiments too deep. Eventually, Phil Jackson would have to return to the scene of his epiphany, to the place where he discovered his destiny, to New York. It was 45 years ago, when Jackson was an injured reserve with the New York Knicks, that he first realized he wanted to coach. The Knicks' legendary leader, Red Holtzman, made Jackson his assistant and began encouraging him to follow in his footsteps. No one could have envisioned that Jackson would not only outdo Holtzman, but every other coach professional sports has ever known. 6 rings with the Chicago Bulls, 5 with the Los Angeles Lakers. When combined with the 2 he won as a player for the Knicks, they make Jackson the undisputed king of American team sports. For no man alive has ever won as much as Jackson. The notion that the Knicks in their hallowed arena, Madison Square Garden, represent the mecca of basketball has become sheer myth, if not outright mockery. Can the 68-year-old Jackson, not as a player, not as a coach, but this time as the president of basketball operations, change that? He will try to do so wearing a title he has never known, looking into the eyes of a challenge he has never faced. But if Jackson can stabilize the Knicks, make them attractive to the league's superstars, turn them into a perennial contender, and win that ever so elusive ring, it would perhaps be his greatest accomplishment.
General manager.
And I should tell you guys, you haven't been watching Colin Cowherd a whole lot. He is anti-Nick, anti-Carmelo.
Oklahoma City Thunder.
You know, if they made him the head coach, he'd still be going on like this.
The general manager, it's a great thing because he's really, really busy, you know, making deals. And so I think the structure of the Knicks is so flawed, it doesn't really matter who you get in there. But it's interesting. I really went deep into all the Phil Jackson Knicks stuff. And Chris Broussard just came on and said, is it possible that he's using the Knicks to get a better deal from the Lakers? I thought about that last night. I don't have any sources that say that's true, but I thought about it because I think ideally he'd like to stay living on the beach in 77 degrees. But Adrian Wojnarowski of Yahoo Sports, and everybody wrote stories about Phil Jackson, but I thought he had a very interesting line. He had a source tell him that nobody will ever have full autonomy with the Knicks, and it will never be the Isaiah relationship with James Dolan. But his line in the story that really stuck out to me is, Dolan will never feel so good about Phil Jackson because Phil Jackson will never let Dolan think he feels so good about him. Divide and conquer has always been Phil's game plan, from Jerry Krause in Chicago to Jerry West in Los Angeles. And that's unlikely to change now, especially with a $10 to $12 million deal. I'll say it again. Jackson will never let Dolan think he feels so good about it. The reality is, you can look at somebody's life teachings or religion, and it says a lot about him. Phil Jackson's always been into Zen, the attainment of enlightenment, personal expression, de-emphasizing doctrine and sutras. What does it mean? It means Phil's always questioned age and authority, James Dolan. He's not into rigid doctrines. No talking to the media. A Dolan doctrine. Phil is comfortable with uncomfortable. He never calls the first time out, even in the NBA Finals. He wants his players to solve their own issues. Read Phil's book, See the Unseen, Hear the Unheard. Leadership isn't forcing your will, it's mastering the art of letting go. That's the opposite of James Dolan. Phil's entire career has been dividing people into camps. Why? Because rich alpha males struggle with him. Pat Riley does and did. Jerry Krause, Jerry Reinsdorf, Kobe did. He is very difficult for alpha males who age with power. Now, he did turn Michael Jordan, Kobe, and Shaq around. How did he do it? They were young. They were still seeking empowerment. With Michael Jordan, he sat him down and said, what do you want to be? Score less, win more. With Kobe, he said, learn to give to get. With Jack, he said, less criticism of teammates and more joy. They will follow you. It's all in his book. Let go of your habits. Create new ones. That's Phil's Zen. That's his message. It's the opposite of James Dolan, who's a control freak, who won't let any of his players talk to media without a Knicks person there, who doesn't want his coaches talking to the media. So I thought of all the articles I read about Phil Jackson, and you may think the Zen stuff is a bunch of hocus pocus. That's a different show. You may not buy into Zen and Buddhism. That's fine. Everybody's got their own Muslim, Christianity, Buddhism, LDS. It's fine with me. Monks. We've never had a monk win an NBA championship, but it's certainly possible. But if you look at what Phil is, he is about enlightenment, growing, not forcing. James Dolan, I could argue, is the opposite. That's where I think the problem lies in this radio. Fire away.
Yeah, and talking about Phil Jackson and Dolan, that's why I believe it has to be just a ploy to get players there. I mean, they're not going to get along, probably, and who knows if he's good at that job. I mean, we know he's good at coaching, but to be a president, who knows?
Well, but remember now, is that the NBA is a players' league. If the only thing Phil does is get Kevin Love and Russell Westbrook to New York, he has wildly succeeded. So if Phil Jackson is being used by James Dolan to simply be a magnet for elite players, that's not terrible. That's not terrible. Does he have the Pat Riley coffee is for closers ability? Is he the recruiter John Calipari, Nick Sabanar? If that's all Phil can do, by the way, that is not a terrible thing. If he's a failure in the draft, but is a tremendous enabler of stars, that's great.